Now, one of the great advantages to cloud computing in Microsoft Azure specifically is the ability to grow and shrink your resource usage depending on your actual needs. So if you have a website and you need to add a server during a peak period and then reduce a server during a slow period, that is sort of the benefit of cloud computing over having your own web servers that you own in a hosted environment. But when you look at creating a virtual machine, and even if you could automate it, then you have to then create alerts and then have automation scripts that create new VMs, add them to a load balancer. That's sort of a lot of work, and it's a pretty common task. So what Microsoft provides for the scaling of virtual machines is called a virtual machine scale set. So we'll go into the resource, create a resource, and we're going to start searching for scale set. And we can see virtual machine scale set is provided as a service. Now, what this is basically virtual machines, 2 or more virtual machines, running behind a load balancer, and that's provided to you in a single package. So if we hit create here, we can see the creation screen is a little bit more complicated than a single VM. We have health tabs and management tabs and scaling tabs that we don't have in a regular VM. But we do have to create resource group. So I'll create a resource group. We give the entire scale set a name. So choose the region. I'm going to put this back into the central US region as I did before. We have the same options. Now, we don't have availability sets with scale sets. We'll talk about that in a second, but you do have the option of putting your VMSS into specific data centers for availability zones. And again, this enhances your availability. For a virtual machine scale set, of course, you can choose any of the traditional default images. Or, I mean, we should say you could create your own image. If you have a machine that you can back up and use as an image, prepare it, you could upload this into Azure and that becomes the image that you use to deploy the machine. We do have this low priority option for Azure Spot Instance. So if we want these machines to be running only on the low priority version, then we can do that. Leave that as no. We get the default VM size. We'll leave that as the default as well. DS1, we talked about that in the VM section. We have to give those machines. Now, all machines will get the same user ID and password. Remember, we're choosing a Windows machine, so we get the Windows setup here. We can also use our licenses from Hybrid Benefit. Same as the VM in terms of choosing the premium solid state disk as your operating system disk and maybe having additional network disks added. It's going to create a brand new virtual network. We can, create a load balancer. So if we want this virtual machine scale set to be in part of an existing load balancing solution, we could just add that to a load balancer, but it does have its own load balancer. So we go next into the scaling option. And this is basically a load balancer that we can create with the VMSS. And look, we get the initial instance count in this case of 2. So we're going to create 2 virtual machines. And we can have the manual policy, which means we can just go in and manually add a machine, or we can have a built-in policy that will have 1 to 10 machines, or in this case, I'm going to do 1 to 5 machines based on a CPU threshold, and it's going to be above 75% CPU utilization. It's going to add 1 virtual machine. And if it's 25% CPU utilization or lower, it's going to reduce a virtual machine. Do we want to collect diagnostics logs? We talked about diagnostics. And if we were to put this into availability zones, how do we want to handle the availability zones? And so we can have a specific policy. This again deals with availability. Now, again, this is similar to the VMs where we got security center. We've got operating system thing. I can turn off diagnostics. Now, the other thing about a load balancer particularly is that you can actually monitor. There's a health probe aspect. And so you can basically ping an HTTP endpoint. So this is the root domain of port 80 on each of the servers, and that will then tell you whether the server is working or not. We could have a specific, health.html page that will not tax the resources of your server, because you don't want your health probe to be like pinging the database and all that stuff, or maybe you do. But sometimes people just have a simple HTML page being served up by the website. This is a recent addition, this automatic repair. It's one of the newer things within Azure is that virtual machines can now basically delete and reinstantiate virtual machines that are not working. So the ability for it to delete those unhealthy instances. So what would happen in the past is it would just kick it out of the load balancer. It would leave it, but it would not be serve traffic. Well, now you can have Azure automatically, reinstantiate instances that are misbehaving. We can skip through. The Advanced tab has some specific VMSS things. So by default, there's a limit of 100 instances in a single virtual machine scale set. So you could not have a 101 instance scale set. But you can enable this, and what it uses is called a placement group. And so essentially, it's going to create multiple 100 instance scale sets into different groups. And this allows you to get to 1,000 VMSS. There's also how your VMs are going to be spread out among different data centers if you're using availability zones. Remember, in the creation of the VMs, we could have both an extension or cloud in it. Now, the placement group, we said this in the VMs, it actually makes your resources closer together. It's almost the opposite of availability. And you might want that if these VMs need to talk to each other and you're not concerned with uptime. So we're going to skip over this, skip over the tags we talked about. And so with this create button, I'm now creating a load balancer with 2 running VMs that will automatically scale between 1 and 5 VMs, depending on CPU utilization. And again, we could have enabled a VM extension. We could have deploying certain code. We could use images that already have everything that we need. And so this is sort of if you've got the need for multiple virtual machines running in a load balancer to scale up and down, one option you can have is to have Azure take care of that for you using a virtual machine scale set. Now, it's not mandatory because you could create your own VMs, create your own load balancer, create your own automation scripting to grow and shrink the size of your load balanced VMs yourself. But this is also provided for you for no additional cost. Like the virtual machine scale set charges you for the VMs that you use, and there's no additional cost for using this routine versus using it on your own.